The providence and reason of God. Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes.
The denominations created upon the Bible are first Judaism, followed by Catholicism, what is known as the Old Church, and then Protestantism. Judaism maintains itself with the Old Testament they originally possessed, while the New and Old Christianity are based on the Bible composed from the Gospels to Revelation. And these two religions are known to have two each different salvation theories as their framework. Judaism has the law of salvation known as the Law of Moses, which is the methodology of salvation, the foundation of the theory of salvation. However, although Catholicism and Protestantism may have claims about salvation, they have neither a clear methodology for salvation nor a biblical argument that proves Christ is the Messiah. If there had been a biblical demonstration, Judaism would have disappeared. It is an unimaginable thing that Catholicism or Christianity would lack the theory of salvation, which is a basic condition for the establishment of a religion. But in fact, it does not exist. Simply put, what a philosopher claimed: I went to study at a theological seminary, but there was no way of salvation there. Which is a fact from the standpoint of academic logic. The Bible, composed of 66 books, is classified into 5 categories. 1. From Genesis to Esther are historical records. 2. Next, from Job to the Song of Songs are classified as sacred writings by both Judaism and the New and the Old Christianity. 3. Following that, the prophetic writings called the prophets are from Isaiah to Malachi. 4. The next are the 4 Gospels. 5. The rest are the epistles of the apostles, and the last is the Revelation. Jews have up to the 3rd category and speak of doctrines based on the law of Moses, while Christianity has added the Gospels and epistles to create its doctrines. At present, countless pseudo-religions have also been born out of Revelation, which belongs to the tail end. In this state, Judaism currently claims that Jesus was merely a pseudo-rabbi. The basis for this can be summarized in the following 3 points. The Talmud takes issue with this and calls Christianity a boat with many holes.
Christian theology's hole 1. The absence of proof for the inevitability of the differences and contradictions of the Gospels.
The Gospels are composed of 4 books, and 3 of them are called the Synoptic Gospels. The teachings of Jesus are encapsulated in parables in the 3 books called the Synoptic Gospels. These records are accounts of Jesus' teachings, each written by 3 different people from their own perspectives. The problem is that these 3 books contain not only minor records but also core teachings that are contradictory or significantly different from one another. Christianity, which calls the Bible a complete revelation, has so far failed to prove the inevitability of these differences and contradictions, and Judaism takes issue with this point to refuse to acknowledge Jesus as the Messiah. To cover up this problem, pseudo-sects say the Bible is not complete revelation, and they attach other scriptures to it and make their own salvation theories as their doctrines. In fact, ideologies such as pluralism or interdenominationalism are variants produced by these logical problems.
Christian theology's hole 2. The absence of proof for the establishment of Christianity's priesthood of all believers in relation to the priests of Judaism, Levi.
There is a biblical logic that neither Judaism, Catholicism, nor Protestantism can change, and that is the priesthood system. Christianity has not been able to biblically prove the problem of the transfer of the priesthood. According to biblical logic, the principle is that the religious leader, established by God, becomes the leader of a religious group based on the Bible. Holding the position of leader without proper biblical demonstration is biblically unlawful. The Jews have the law of Moses and biblical evidence that the priesthood of Levi was acknowledged by God. However, in contrast, Christianity claims the theory of the priesthood of all believers, but this does not have a biblical basis. There is a regulation for the transfer of this priesthood in the law of Moses. From the perspective of the Jews who hold the vested right of being the chosen people, if Jesus had been truly the Messiah, then Christianity should have claimed the priesthood of all believers according to the regulation of transfer of the law of Moses. Only then, the theory of salvation in the New Testament following the Old Testament can gain logical validity. If that validity is secured, it meets the basic requirements as a religion, regardless of whether Judaism acknowledges it or not. However, within the New Testament, there is no evidence to prove that Christ was appointed as a priest to succeed the law of Moses.
Christian theologies whole 3. The absence of the perfect law as the law of the heart claimed by the New Testament.
To claim the priesthood of all believers, there must rightly be a law that the priest oversees. This is because a priest is a person in charge of God's law. However, Christianity has doctrine that they created but no statutes. A priest is a person who administers the law, but since there is no law, there can be no priest either. The priesthood of all believers was made by citing the content of epistles in the New Testament. But because it is no logical basis, academically it cannot be considered even a hypothesis academically. Within the current scope of theology, biblical demonstration of the priesthood of all believers is impossible. I will briefly confirm this fact through the content of the New Testament. This is in the order of the arrangement in the Bible. John chapter 16. These things have I spoken unto you in Proverbs, but the time cometh, when I shall no more speak unto you in Proverbs, but I shall show you plainly of the Father. The teachings of the Gospels are all in figures of speech, that is, parables. This means the content of the Gospels is not stated plainly. John chapter 16. I have yet many things to say unto you, but ye cannot bear them now. The Gospel of John is the last book of the Gospels, but it says that he did not say everything because they could not bear it. Acts 2. Therefore, being by the right hand of God exalted, and having received of the Father the promise of the Holy Ghost, he hath shed forth this, which ye now see and hear. This is what Peter said during his first sermon after the resurrection in the early part of Acts. The phrase, this, which you now see and hear, is used. However, the substance of this is not in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. It is saying what is perfect has not yet come. Ephesians chapter 3. How that by revelation he made known unto me the mystery as I wrote afore in few words. The record in Ephesians says it is nothing more than a brief record of a mystery. James chapter 1. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. James says that faith with deeds is found in such a perfect law that can be looked into. That is, another looking into law that is not the imperfect law of Moses, and he says that seeing it is doing it. However, this perfect law that can be looked into does not exist in the New Testament. Likewise, the epistles contain only previews of what is perfect or indirect descriptions of what already exists. In addition to these, there are many other phrases that can serve as evidence that its substance does not exist. Ultimately, this means that it does exist the completed, looking into law, which is the substance of what Christ perfected the law of Moses, but it is not found in the New Testament. Although this looking into law clearly does not exist within Christian theology. Christian theology is centered on the logic of Christ's, the realization of public righteousness. Therefore, theology has the logic of the realization of public righteousness. But it only has the logic concerning the process of that realization, and no proof for the result. Therefore, the things that are made to replace this are shamanistic claims based on illogic. Illogical claims such as, everything is completed by the cross, so if you believe in it, you will be saved, or, God is love, therefore everything is fulfilled only by loving, have been devised as a means to cover up the fact that there is no perfect law, which is the result of the realization of public righteousness. This process-oriented logic without any result ultimately led to the conclusion, just believe. And this, in turn, gave strength to shamanistic mysticism, like psychiatrically problematic hallucinations and auditory hallucinations. And the hearts of those drawn to what is visible and tangible were led in that direction. Ultimately, the logic of the realization of public righteousness without a result has only empowered irrational mystery. Then, what is the logic of the realization of public righteousness? The realization of public righteousness as the connecting logic that claims the New Testament follows the Old Testament. The realization of public righteousness is the core logic of the argument that Christ is the Messiah, as it claims that Christ opened the path to salvation that had been closed. This explanation is equal to describing the entire structure of the Bible, so I will be as concise as possible. 1. Public righteousness is God's will to act fairly in all dealings between God, the Creator, and man, his creation. 2. The reason God created all things and man was, first of all, for his own good pleasure. This is based on the logic that God made man in his own image and with the same nature as himself. This means that man's instinctive desire for his children is not fundamentally different from God's own intent. 3. God is a complete being, as a spirit, while man is an incomplete being, made from dust. Therefore, for God to have his child, the created being, man must achieve the result of becoming a God. 4. An angel has only the code of good, Satan has only the code of evil, and while God and humans have the codes for both good and evil. If the created being, man, were without free will, he would be nothing more than a puppet, therefore. God endowed the human heart with the ability to discern good and evil, so that his free will could be exercised, and he gave him a forbidden thing, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, to manifest this function of discernment. This is part of the enactment of public righteousness. Good and evil are distinctions with relativity, so in order to recognize good, evil must exist relative to it. The condition of being a God is possessing both good and evil like God, but not committing evil and acting only in good. 5. Therefore, after bestowing both good and evil, he also gave the relative evil the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in order to activate what was bestowed. 6. However, because man is an incomplete being, he inevitably ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and as a natural consequence, was driven out of Eden, where only a God can dwell, and entered the training ground to become a God. That is the world. 7. God allowed angel who possess the code for good and Satan who possesses the code for evil to be active in the world. The serpent was given the mission of making man return to his origin, which is dust, while angel was dispatched with the mission of helping man return to the state of God without returning to dust. 8. Thus now, the man who has both good and evil in his heart has stepped onto the ring to fight a single round of boxing match, facing the choice: will I return to dust, Or will I completely overcome evil in my heart and attain the state of God? 9. However, just as the Bible records that man plans only evil from his birth, he was only defeated by evil. So, through flood of Noah, leaving only Noah behind first, God reset humanity back to dust. It means that God decided to start over. 10. After that, God granted the method of practicing humbling and emptying, which is the way to overcome evil, so that people can obtain the result of victory. That is the law of Moses. 11. However, people rather used that law as a means of evil to fill their own bellies. In doing so, they rendered the law of Moses, which was the law of deeds, presented as a way to overcome evil, meaningless and ineffective. 12. Now, the way for man to be a god is gone again. That is why Jesus rebuked the overseers of God's law in the Gospels. 13. This time, God gives the law of the heart, which is his final hidden card, that is the Bible expresses as the prepared little light. This is the last means for a man to become a god. However, there is a blind spot in giving this law of the heart. If a man lives according to this, he could become a god, but giving this to man goes against the rule of public righteousness. This is because it would violate the major premise that served as a rule: you will surely die if you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It means that he would literally become God who acts solely this and that as he pleases. 14. Therefore, God first came into the world in the flesh to uphold the public righteousness that he had established, and showed an example of overcoming evil with good, according to the law of the heart, to be given now, and followed the order of God himself, keeping public righteousness first. That is the demonstration of coming in the flesh, being crucified on the cross. According to the law of the heart, overcoming evil through death and giving life to the Spirit. Therefore, when a Christian follows the path Christ walked according to that law, God is going to give life to his Spirit. The event of the cross became the realization of public righteousness because it was an event that fulfilled two conditions: the revocation of death and the provision of the way to be able to live eternally. Ultimately, this God who ties the knot must untie it, provided the basis for upholding God's will, which is public righteousness, retracting the law that said, "You shall surely die," and granting the law of the heart, which is the way to be able to live eternally. That is why Jesus said, "It is finished," on the cross. Ultimately, that phrase is the same as saying, God's public righteousness has also been upheld and the way for man to become a god has been granted as well. And so, what is needed now is the actual substance of the law of the heart, granted as a result of the realization of public righteousness. However, the problem is that this substance does not exist within Christianity. Like that, there is no theory of salvation within Christian theology. The substance of the theory of salvation as the result of the realization of public righteousness, the Proverbs of Solomon. There are the following records in the Gospels. Luke chapter 24. And they said one to another, "Did not our heart burn within us, while he talked with us by the way, and while he opened to us the Scriptures?" Luke chapter 24. And he said unto them, "These are the words which I spake unto you, while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled, which were written in the law of Moses, and in the prophets, and in the Psalms, concerning me." Then opened he their understanding, that they might understand the Scriptures. This is the record of evidence that the perfect law, to be granted, already existed even before the New Testament was written. This newly granted law of the heart is precisely the Proverbs of Solomon. Solomon's Proverbs, which is the law of the heart, was prepared in advance through the hands of the Jews. However, it has a logical structure that the logic of its teachings cannot serve as the law of the heart, without the realization of public righteousness. Which is God who ties the knot must untie it. Simply put, since they couldn't know the whole, they couldn't understand what the individual parts meant. The book of Proverbs consists of a total of 31 chapters. Chapters 1 through 9 are the introduction, and the main body begins from chapter 10. But this main body has a structure where each verse is a single law, and you can understand the meaning of one verse only by knowing the entire text. Also, the content seems to discuss sub-metaphysical advice for daily living, as if it were merely a guide to worldly conduct. However, conversely, it discusses the law of the heart, which is metaphysical. Because of this, although it's called a book of wisdom, even the Jews who had no interest in the realization of Christ's public righteousness did not know its contents. And for the Christian leaders who understood the realization of public righteousness, it was impossible to even read it because their hearts were only focused on worldly gains. Solomon is called the King of Wisdom. However, this is precisely the reason why no one today knows regarding the question of why he is called as the King of Wisdom. Also conversely, the salvation logic of Proverbs cannot logically demonstrate the principle of God who ties the knot. Must untie it, using only the record of the event of the cross in the New Testament. The reason is that the event of the cross is not found within the Old Testament. So it is merely a unilateral assertion of the New Testament without objective grounding. The Book of Job, which is called the flower of wisdom literature, contains the record of evidence that can secure precisely that objectivity. This is because the record of evidence was explicitly stated as the judgment of God, that the priesthood was transferred from the former priest, Levi, to Christ. However, because this book is also written in parables, just like the Gospels, if you don't know the original meaning of the terms used, it's impossible to even read it. As a result, the text is written in such a way that you can't understand what each of the characters Job, his three friends, Elihu, and God are saying, why each person says as he does, or why God delivers such a judgment. For this reason, neither Judaism nor Christianity has known this content. The books of Job and Proverbs are essential for logically demonstrating the validity of the theory of salvation of the New Testament. In the realization of God's public righteousness and the proof of Christ as the Messiah.
If you continue to follow the Word, you will be able to encounter explanations on the differences and the inevitability of contradictions in the Synoptic Gospels, as well as the interpretations of Proverbs and Job.
If you visit the Naver Cafe, Farmer's Wisdom, you can read explanations of the entire Bible without a sign-up process.